Now, in the wake of Grand Parade shutting down Dunkin Donuts and Baskin Robbins in Cape Town, we take a look at local companies who have bought international brands into South Africa that fail. Companies such as Grand Parade, Taste, Woolworths and Edcon have seen poor performance of international brands on South African lands. Joining me now to discuss this phenomenon is Syd Vianello, an independent retail analyst, and Chris Gilmour, who is an independent investment analyst. Gentlemen, Happy New Year, should I say. Yeah, you were telling me it's too late. It's never.
Yeah, I suppose it's never too late.
Yeah, it's never too late. Chris, let me just start with you. Basic undergrad international business would tell you the process of internationalization. You piggyback, then after that, set up a sales subsidiary, and there's a process to it. Do you get the sense that maybe not enough deliberation or the thinking had gone into many of these expansions before you actually sign that final investment decision?
Yeah, look, if you take some of the ones that you've mentioned, I mean, you've talked about Baskin Robbins and Dunkin Donuts within the Grand Parade sphere. Taste with Domino's and Starbucks. You mentioned a couple of things in Edcon. You have to bear in mind, if you're going to bring these in to a country that's never had them before, you're going to have very, very deep pockets and very, very long time horizons. So to answer your question, you're going to have to read the fine print very, very carefully. I mean, Starbucks, for example, Syd, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they've got about 12 outlets. They probably need
After how many years?
Well, exactly.
After how many years, and they've still only got 12 outlets?
They probably need north of 150, or maybe even more, to start making money. Even the most successful of all of them is Burger King within Grand Parade. They've got 80 outlets. They probably need 150 to 200 to make it commercially viable.
To put it in a proper context, Burger King has only just become profitable at the EBITDA level.
But
I don't think they covered appreciation yet, but the bottom line, what Chris is really trying to say is you need critical mass. You're not going to make money out of 10 stores.
Right.
You will make money when you get to 100 stores, but it costs a lot of investment to get from 1 to 100. That's really the bottom line.
This is my biggest issue. My biggest issue is finally we are seeing Burger King turn it around. The bottom line is finally looking good. And this comes with time and not revolving doors, not CFOs and CEOs going out every other second. Shouldn't these establishments be accorded some extra time before we start seeing the revolving doors, Syd?
Yes, but you need the capital to fund the extra time. I think the real issue if you take a Grand Parade, is when they started out, they made a huge amount of money out of their gambling investments or what have you. The shareholders, I think, probably now with hindsight, the shareholders probably felt that perhaps they should have distributed that money, given it back to the shareholders, and not ventured into the food industry. Because what's happened in the food industry is obviously you've got the cost of building from store number 1 to store number 100. Then you've got to fund the losses to get from store 1 to store 100. Yes, the losses go down over time, but they start at a huge level.
Right.
So you've got a funding cost for how many years? It could take 10 years to get there. And I think that's what the shareholders have been upset about, and that's why you've seen the revolving door impact.
Right. Chris, let me bring you back into this one. Syd has just mentioned something that's quite interesting. At some point, shareholders, you and me, we see some of these huge deals being penned, we get excited, we're thinking dividend next year. Is this something that actually adds more pressure? Because you're mentioning here, after a few months, after a few financial years, shareholders are actually expecting a dividend, expecting a payout. Is this pressure actually something to actually point at that just kind of exacerbates the situation?
It is. It is another factor that you have to look at. And Taste is a classic example. We've said 12 Starbucks stores, they've got a few Domino's, and they're currently in a rights issue at what, 10, 14 cents?
No, 10.
10 cents.
10.
They're probably going to end up taking out the minorities once they get to the 90% level. For precisely what you're talking about, to get out of the public eye so they don't have to keep on paying dividends. But just coming back to something that Syd was saying, if you actually look for a company that has been here for a bit longer, McDonald's has been here for 20 years. It's hardly been a raging success story despite the protestations to the contrary from the current CEO, Greg Solomon. And I've spoken to him on a few occasions about this. They should have done far better than the 150 or 200 stores that they've got. Compare them with KFC, north of 700. You know, you can't, they're not comparable. And why is that? I don't actually know the reason. But all I'm saying is that I think it endorses, underlines the view that if you're going to persevere, you've got to be there for the very, very long term. And probably, to answer your question, in an unlisted form.
That's something that's interesting. I actually wanted to touch that later on. But let's talk about KFC, because I've seen KFC north of South Africa, and you know, their motto is not too bad. They're actually working. The pricing is not so bad. Is chicken the answer? Pardon my oblivion here. Syd?
Chicken could well be the answer, because because remember, it's not just KFC that's been incredibly successful.
Right.
We've also got Licken, the privately owned company owned by a Greek family.
And they're accused.
The patriarch died, he passed away about a year ago, but the family continued to run it. And it's incredibly profitable. From what we understand, it is privately owned, but it's chicken. Chicken seems to be an affordable protein fast food product. You know, more so than maybe you know, something like Baskin Robbins or whatever, which is really just
it's an ephemeral nice to have.
Yeah, a nice to have.
It's more of a staple.
Here we're talking about a protein product. I think that's really what it boils down to.
Let's talk about South African companies going outside as opposed to the other way around. And this has actually been a real struggle, you know, from David Jones, the Australian excavation, to some of the looks around in the UK. It has not particularly been a smooth ride. Again, Chris, this might be a very wide question, but what are they actually doing wrong here?
Okay, look, there is one example I can think of offhand, and that's Nando's in the fast food. They've been phenomenally successful in many parts of the world. But if you look at the retailers, many of the retailers that have gone to Australia, for example, with the one exception, and the great irony is the one exception, I think, was Metro Cash and Carry, that no longer exists here and has done quite well in Australia. But for most of them, it's been the graveyard. If you go up north, into the northern hemisphere, bear in mind, you know, you've got a 6-month difference in terms of looking at fashions. So that makes it tougher. You've also got very, very much more expensive rentals and this type of thing. TFG, Foschini Group, they seem to be doing reasonably well. Truworths perhaps not so well in the UK. Again, you've got to pay your dues. It takes a long time. You can't just go over their land and think in 4 or 5 years' time we're going to make some big tom.
You've mentioned Metro Cash and Curry, and up north in East Africa, I remember seeing a Metro Cash and Curry. I think it was 1999.
They had one in Nairobi.
Yeah, Uganda too, massive.
And it didn't make money because the local traders there took them on and basically wiped them out.
Yeah. The
but once again,
it's
you know, your local trader knows more about what people want than what Metro would ever have known.
Let's talk about the level of independence. Now, this is something else. When you do make an acquisition, chances are they're going to be on your board. You know how this usually goes. Is there something else that actually limits the likes of Woolies when they actually go out there? Someone from the outside does not particularly know what is happening on the South African landscape. Is there something that we can actually point out, Chris, and say the new board member or the CEO at the helm coming in is oblivious to what is happening in the market here?
So when you're talking about Woolies, presumably you're referring to the David Jones debacle.
Yes.
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of this has been promulgated by their very charismatic CEO.
I see a smug here coming on, Chris. I see you smiling.
Look, I mean, I think what Moore did was he thought, well, you know, basically let's bring in women. He had a bit of success with Country Road, Trenery, and stuff like that. So I thought, well, maybe David Jones.
I'm not so sure about Trenery.
Yeah,
Country Road, yes.
Country Road was okay.
Trenery is questionable.
But you bring in David Jones, you know, into the equation. It's a brand that nobody knows in South Africa. And how long did it last? A couple of years. And then
but he also,
November.
in my opinion, he also did something which I think is fundamentally wrong. David Jones in Australia is positioned as the upmarket, one
That's the
of
thing, the pricing.
upmarket
How
brands.
is the pricing here?
And if you walk in a David Jones, you will see, brands which they run under franchise. You will see only some of the top international brands in their stores. In other words,
1%ers.
But there is a positioning in the market. It is an upmarket brand. They then brought the brand here, and quite frankly, some of the product, once again, it's my opinion, some of the product was probably worse than a classic Woolworths product in construction and what have you. It was not positioned as an upmarket brand. It compared in price to a typical Woolworths product, but I thought in some cases the quality was probably worse. Made, if you looked at some of the garments, have a look at the place of manufacture. The same factories that manufactured for Woolworths, whether they were in Bangladesh or China or Mauritius or what have you, they were making the same product under the David Jones label. In other words, they took a brand and they took an upmarket brand from Australia and turned it into a kind of middle of the road, I'm scared to say down market, but middle of the road brand in South Africa. They missed, the brand lost its aura in South Africa. That's my view.
Syd, I'll get in trouble. If we keep this up, I'm going to get in trouble. Let's talk about some of the money here. 2017, Woolies spending $56 million to fix David Jones, Country Road, a capital injection of what, $11 million US dollars. They've actually thrown money at some of these brands, and there's just no results.
Yeah. Look, I think fundamentally, department stores the world over, again, I don't know what your views are on this, Syd, but the attraction is diminishing, whether it's in the States, whether it's in the UK with operations like House of Fraser and Debenhams.
There are two department store brands, in my view, in the world that have survived so far and well. And the reason why they survived is because they've remained unique. One is a company that has one store in the world called Harrods.
Yeah.
And the other one is Selfridges, which I think they have one in Manchester, don't they? In other words, they've got two stores.
Yeah.
But everybody knows the one store, the one in Oxford Street. But they have retained their uniqueness. There was a story in one of the British, I think it was the FT, excuse me, a few years ago, where they interviewed the MD of Harrods. And they asked him, how do you remain relevant? And he said, take the kiddies' clothing section. We stock products which you cannot obtain anywhere else in the world. In other words, we will stock a French brand. If you want to travel to somewhere in France and look for that brand, because you may find it in one or two stores in France, but it's a world-class brand, we'll do so. But we stock it in Harrods. But you won't find it anywhere else in the world. And by doing that, we have created a kiddies section, a kiddies floor in our store, which is unique in the world and has the best of everything. We don't stock middle-of-the-road brands in Harrods. Full stop. You won't find them here. That's the uniqueness. Well, I don't know. I don't know.
No, I agree.
I don't know how many other department stores in the world have done that.
Few, if any of them. Yeah,
exactly.
Gentlemen, we've actually run out of time, but fascinating conversation. I was just about to ask the two of you, just in one word, where do you guys shop? Chris, let me start with you.
Comes to food, Woolies, because there is no competition whatsoever.
Right.
Clothing, it's all overseas.
Syd?
My wife does the food shopping, and she does go to Woolworths. And if she can't get it at Woolworths, she will go to another privately owned store, which only has one store in the whole country in Johannesburg. Better not mention the name.
Trumpshire?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
Our clothing, I hate to say it, but I'm like Chris, I buy a lot of it abroad.
Gentlemen, this could have gone on for another 1 hour, but many thanks for making time to speak to us. Syd Vianello, an independent retail analyst, and Chris Gilmour, an independent investment analyst.